Allah.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome. We want to take you on a journey today through 15 centuries, from a world steeped in darkness in every sense of the word to an epoch brimming with science and light. A journey that will take us also deep into what spirituality is and what it has to do with science and understanding and signs and prophecy. We will discuss the phenomena associated with eclipses of the moon and the sun, an incredibly detailed prophecy made by Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, some 15 centuries ago.
The Holy Prophet Shallallahu, alaihi wasallam, he prophesied that a time would come amongst my own community that they would become the worst creation under the canopy of the heavens. He would say religious clerics, imams in the Muslim world, would be such that they would recite the Quran, but the meanings wouldn't go into their hearts and it would just stay stuck in their throats. He mentioned that mosques would be full of worshippers but devoid of guidance. And he said, this is the fate of the Muslim world. And it's in prophecy when you look at it that here's a Prophet ﷺ who established a Muslim community, then says this is the fate of the Muslim community. But at the same time, even though he gave us this prophecy, at the same time he also gave us another prophecy of hope. And so this was the need of the Messiah. We believe this prophecy has been fulfilled in the sense that the Muslim world, when we look at it today, these people are in many ways the worst creation under the canopy of the heavens. When you have ISIS and Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda and Taliban and all of these groups, and they're committing all of these acts in the name of Islam, they can put the name Islam there, but their acts are completely against Islam. So that part of the prophecy has been fulfilled. So it necessitated that reformer, that Messiah, that Mahdi must also come now to reform these people, to teach them what true Islam actually is. And so that was the need of the Messiah or of the Imam Mahdi. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he made the prophecy about the coming of this Messiah, about the Imam Mahdi, he also gave us certain signs. He says, look out for these signs. These will be the signs of his arrival or the signs of his truthfulness. One of the signs, one of the most famous signs that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, prophesied was a sign of the eclipses.
नजरें उठा के अपनी देखो जरा खुदारा के चांद और सूरज करते हैं क्या इशारा नजरें उठा के अपनी देखो जरा खुदारा के चांद और सूरज करते हैं क्या इशारा जिसके थे मुंतजिर वो शाहकार आ गया है वो गुलजार रश के गुलजार आ गया है जिसके थे मुंतजिर वो शाहकार आ गया है वो गुलजार रश के गुलजार आ गया है दीने मोहम्मदी का गम ख्वार आ गया है वो मेरे कारवाने अबरार आ गया है नजरें उठा के अपनी देखो जरा खुदारा के चांद और सूरज करते हैं क्या इशारा
My name is Dr. Eric Christian. I'm a research scientist with NASA. So a lunar eclipse is when the moon passes through the shadow of the earth. And so you have to have an alignment between the sun, let's say you're the sun, I'm the earth, the moon is behind the earth. That's normally when you would get a full moon, but the full moon is when the moon is either higher or lower than the earth. But sometimes it lines up just perfectly and the shadow of the earth shines on the moon, and the moon gets, even though it's supposed to be a full moon, the moon will get dark for hours, and that's the lunar eclipse. So there are actually three types of lunar eclipses. There's the total lunar eclipse, which is when the moon is completely in the shadow of the Earth, and the entire moon will get dark. There's a partial lunar eclipse where the shadow will go over half or less of the moon, and you'll see the moon will look like a phase of the moon at some level. Part of it will be dark, but some of it will be still lit. And then there's also a third type called a penumbral eclipse, which actually happens pretty often, but isn't very important. It just means the full moon is a little dimmer because it's in the outskirts of the shadow of the Earth. And so it's just a full moon that's a little dimmer than normal, and people don't really talk about that. Solar eclipse is when, again, the sun, the moon, and the Earth line up, except this time the moon is in front of the Earth. And what would normally be a new moon, because you're not seeing the sunlit side of the moon, you're seeing the dark side. But the shadow of the moon then shines across the Earth. But because the moon is smaller than the Earth, it's really just a narrow band that gets a solar eclipse. Unlike the lunar eclipse, where the entire night sky sees the moon go dark, with a solar eclipse, only a small area of the Earth sees the shadow of the moon. There are several types there's actually 4 types of solar eclipses. There's the total solar eclipse, which is the neatest thing possible. That's where the moon completely blocks the light from the sun, and you can see the very much dimmer atmosphere of the sun, which is called the solar corona, and it streams away from the sun. This is what causes the solar wind, and you can actually see it. It's the only time you, with your naked eye, can see the corona of the sun. There's an annular solar eclipse, which is when the moon blocks the sun, but it's a little smaller than the sun. We're actually really lucky that the moon's size is almost exactly right for the sun, but the moon's orbit around the Earth isn't a perfect circle. Sometimes it's further away, sometimes it's closer. And when it's further away, it gets a little bit smaller. And sometimes then it can be smaller than the size of the sun and not block it completely. A partial solar eclipse is when the moon passes in front of the sun but doesn't block the whole thing, and so it's just a partial blocking. And then there's this weird, very rare situation called a hybrid solar eclipse, which is a total solar eclipse on part of the path that the moon shadow takes, and an annular solar eclipse on the other part. And so those only happen, a couple times every century.
For our Mahdi, there are 2 signs which have never appeared before since the creation of the heavens and the earth. Namely, the moon will be eclipsed on the first night in Ramadan, on the first night of the nights on which a lunar eclipse can occur, and the sun will be eclipsed on the middle day, on the middle one of the days on which a solar eclipse can occur. And these signs have not appeared since God created the heavens and the earth.
So when we look at the prophecy, again, the prophecy said that the lunar eclipse will occur at the first of Ramadan. This doesn't mean literally the first day of Ramadan, because that is scientifically impossible for a lunar eclipse to occur on the first of Ramadan. The lunar eclipse can only occur when the moon is full. So that means on the 13th, 14th, or 15th of a lunar month, these are the 3 possible days when a lunar eclipse can occur. So when the hadith says on the first of Ramadan, it means that on the first possible day in that Ramadan when eclipse is possible. So if we take 13, 14, 15, that means the 13th of Ramadan. That means the eclipse must occur on the 13th to fulfill the prophecy. So on the 13th of Ramadan in 1894 is when the lunar eclipse part of the prophecy was fulfilled. That year in Ramadan, on the 13th, which is the first possible day, the moon was eclipsed.
So on March 21st, 1894, there was a partial lunar eclipse. So that means that part of the moon, and only actually a small part of the moon, got blocked by the Earth's shadow. But anybody in Europe, South America, Africa, would have seen, who had a clear sky, would have seen part of the moon fading away as it drifted into the shadow of the Earth.
So when the solar eclipse was supposed to occur, again, we look at the hadith and it says that the sun was supposed to be eclipsed on the middle of the Ramadan. Now again, this doesn't mean on the 15th of the month. That's not scientifically possible. Scientifically speaking, the sun can only be eclipsed on the 27th, 28th, or 29th of any lunar month. So if these are the three possible days, when the hadith says that the sun would be eclipsed on the middle, that means the 28th. It's in the middle of 27 and 29. So it was the 28th of Ramadan that the sun was supposed to be eclipsed. So that same year, in 1894, that same Ramadan, on the 28th of Ramadan, the sun was eclipsed as well, which fulfilled the hadith in its totality.
So on April 6, 1894, there was a total solar eclipse. Actually, it was a hybrid solar eclipse. Part of the path only saw an annular part of the sun. The sun wasn't completely blocked. So this was one of those weird hybrid eclipses. But there was parts of India, China, it actually moved up the eastern coast of India that would have seen a total solar eclipse on April 6th.
The hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ says that these are two signs, the lunar and the solar eclipse, that have never occurred before in the history of the heavens and the earth. So some people may have the objection that how can this factually be true when these eclipses have occurred throughout humanity hundreds if not thousands of times?
So total solar eclipses happen a little less than once a year on the average. Partial eclipses happen about as often, and so between the two of them, they happen more than once a year. And annual eclipses also happen occasionally. So I think on the average, you get about 240 total partial or annular eclipses in a century.
So what we have to remember here is not that the Prophet ﷺ is saying is that these eclipses have never occurred on these dates before. His words were that these are two signs that have never occurred before, meaning these two signs that have occurred for an individual, for a claimant, they have never been used as signs for a claimant before. So these signs have occurred as just natural phenomenon. But God has never used these signs to bear to the truthfulness or to bear testimony to the truthfulness of a claimant. So this was the point that was being made, that never before has God used these two natural phenomena as signs for the truthfulness of a person. So the first time these solar and lunar eclipses occurred on these dates that were prophesied for the advent of a Messiah Mahdi, and when they appeared during his time and he used these as proofs of his truthfulness, that he fulfilled the claim, this was the first time this particular event happened in the context of signs being used to bear witness to the truthfulness of a claimant of prophethood.
Back in early history, 600, 700 AD, 1000 AD, times like that, it would have been very tough to predict when total solar eclipses and total lunar eclipses happened. And you could probably predict because they happen twice a year, there are what are called eclipse seasons, where all the solar and lunar eclipses happen about the same time in around March and around September every year. So you can do some prediction, but the trouble is that especially with total solar eclipses, it's such a narrow band of the Earth that sees the total solar eclipse. The calculation to determine exactly where that band is going to be is really tough. You might be able to predict on such and such a day there could be a partial or total solar eclipse somewhere on the Earth, but it's a lot tougher to predict where that's going to be. We can do that now with computers, but that was beyond, I think, most of the calculations back then.
So now that we have the background of the prophecy of the Holy Prophet ﷺ that the solar and lunar eclipse will occur, and there will be a claimant, and it will be a sign of the truthfulness of the claimant. And when we look at the life of the promised Messiah, again, we see in 1889 he made the claim of being a reformer. He took a bay'at. In 1890 he claimed he was the Messiah. In 1891 he claimed he was the Imam Mahdi. Up till that point, these signs had not appeared. And again, for these signs to have appeared, the lunar and solar eclipse has to have occurred in the same Ramadan. So then we come to 1894, the mission is continuing, it's already started. On the 13th of Ramadan, which corresponds to 21st March of 1894, the moon was eclipsed. And then on the 28th of Ramadan, which corresponds to the 6th of April in 1894, the sun was eclipsed. So that year in 1894, in that Ramadan, on the 13th, the first possible day for lunar eclipse, the moon was eclipsed. And on the 28th of Ramadan, the middle possible day of a solar eclipse, the sun was eclipsed. And this occurred after the promised Messiah made his claim. So in that way, these were two signs that to the truthfulness of his claim.